Let's get to Deshaun Watson, though, because this is the story in football. I actually think the Deshaun Watson situation is overshadowing Championship Sunday. Maybe this is exactly how Watson's people want it, but we're not really talking about the games. Maybe because it's only Tuesday and we still have some time. But if you kind of follow like the pulse of what's being discussed, the number one story right now is Deshaun Watson. And I believe that to be the case because there's 25 teams that in a given situation, if they could have Deshaun Watson, they would say, yes, we want that guy. We'll take him. So this is obviously the story right now. And I thought it was interesting because yesterday on ESPN, I was listening to Dan Orlovsky talk about the Texans situation. And I have not heard this from anyone connected to the organization. I have not heard this from anyone besides Dan Orlovsky. This was Orlovsky yesterday, the now ESPN analyst, discussing what's happening with Deshaun Watson and the Texans organization.
I don't think Deshaun ever plays for the Texans again. I've felt that way for a couple weeks. I don't think he should. He's got every right to feel the way that he feels. And this reminds me of that quote, what you do in darkness will always come to the light. There's been a lot of shady stuff that seems to have been going on for Houston, and there's deeply rooted issues with that organization with how they treat their players, star players. And the reality that Deshaun Watson has just decided to expose it. But I know this. I've talked to some people that are attached to that organization, and I've asked questions. And it's worse than it's being reported. It's worse than that can be said on television. It's a very bad situation. And I don't think we need to run from the reality that this is deeply rooted. And Deshaun Watson, this is not an ego thing. This is a necessity. He needs to get out of that organization. J.J. Watt needs to get out of that organization. Yeah. It's a poorly run place. And their star players need to get out because they're getting ruined.
So that was Orlovsky yesterday, and my pushback on that would be, what could be so bad you can't say on television? I just don't think that is the right wordage by Orlovsky. If you have some information, then report on it, or word it, articulate it properly so it can be said on ESPN. I found that a bit odd in the word selection there from Orlovsky. But let's talk about what he said. It's deeply rooted. What could that mean? Is it an ownership problem? Is that what it is? You know, could Jack Easterby be so, quote-unquote, evil that is why this situation can't be resolved? Do you mean to tell me if the Texans fire Jack Easterby and hire Eric Bieniemy, all of a sudden Deshaun Watson is still going to request a trade and not show up and make things as messy as possible? I just don't buy it. I'm not going to sit here and say that the Texans don't have a lot of issues. They most certainly do. But I push back on this idea that you can't say, you know, what it is on TV. If it's so bad, say what it is. If it is such a messy situation, explain why. I still sit here, and I've been asked this question a ton by Jet fans, of course, about Deshaun Watson. I still sit here on January 19th leaning towards him still being a Texan. Because there's no reason for the Texans to trade this guy. If it gets so messy, before I would trade him, I would tell Deshaun Watson, you're not getting traded. If you don't want to get paid, don't show up to work. You're not going to get paid. Deshaun Watson just signed a 5-year extension. The big money for that extension is not kicked in yet. If he sits out the year, that's another year that tolls over before he gets his big money. Before he starts making his $40 million a year. I think that's your last resort, telling him just to sit out because we're not trading him. This is still a situation that could be fixed. I don't know what Orlovsky is intimating at. You know, there was some thought nationally that, Bob McNair a couple of years ago had that inmates, can't run the asylum line. That's years ago, and Bob McNair has been dead for a couple of years already. And Deshaun Watson had no problem signing his extension last August when Cal McNair was presiding over the team. And Jack Easterby and Bill O'Brien were still in power. When the Texans, who were in the divisional round of the playoffs a year ago, they were the same team that offered Deshaun that extension, he signed it. So I just push back on what Orlovsky said there. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying that Deshaun Watson's unhappy and that he will eventually, formally request a trade. But, You can't say what's really going on TV? That doesn't make any sense to me. I push back on that notion. Option one for the Texans is still to salvage this thing. And what's amazing is yesterday, you had angry Texans fans show up at NRG Stadium right here in Houston and protesting the situation. And then Deshaun Watson had to send out a tweet basically telling everyone that he appreciates their support, but go home because COVID-19 is still a real thing. I mean, this is ugly, and it's amazing we're here. I keep going back to that. It's amazing we're here with the Houston Texans. A year ago, they were in the divisional round of the playoffs, up 24-0. They win that game. They're hosting the AFC title game. They're a favorite in that game over the Titans. Maybe they're in the Super Bowl. But, if my, aunt had hair on her back, you know the saying, she wouldn't be my aunt, she'd be my uncle. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, I understand that. But this idea that the Texans have just been this dumpster fire of an organization, I also push back on that. The Lions haven't won a playoff game since 1992. The Bucs, up until this year, had not been in the playoffs since 2007. The Browns had not been in the playoffs since 2002 up until this year. The Bills had not won a playoff game since the mid-90s up until this year. Texans have won playoff games under Bill O'Brien, under Gary Kubiak. They've won the division several times. Have they won a championship? No. Have they been to an AFC title game? No. But this perception that the Texans are just a dumpster fire of an organization is not fair. And I'm no Texan fan, but let's call it how it is. I still push back on the idea this can't be fixed. They don't even have a head coach yet. And you could offer all the draft picks in the world to the Texans. If you're Joe Douglas, you could offer 4 first-rounders to the Houston Texans. If they don't hit on the quarterback that they take with the second overall pick, none of those picks really matter in the grand scheme of things. If you're a team, the object of being a front office is to find a quarterback as good as Deshaun Watson, who's 25 years old and signed long-term, who's a great leader, who's won games, who's been to the playoffs twice already. That's the object of the game. You don't trade that guy. Even if the Jets offered 4 first-rounders, including the second overall pick, what are the odds that Zach Wilson or Justin Fields are as good as Deshaun Watson? They might be good, but Deshaun Watson, as I've articulated this point before, he's the second most valuable asset in the NFL, with Mahomes being 1, Deshaun being 2, because of age and production. This guy led the NFL in passing yards this past year, a season after they traded away the best receiver in the sport. Deshaun Watson was throwing to guys like Chad Hansen down the stretch. Will Fuller got suspended for the final 5 games of the season, 6 games of the season, whatever it was. It's an ugly situation, but until they have a head coach, until we see Deshaun Watson at least get in a room with Nick Caserio, the new head coach, and Cal McNair, let's calm things down with this idea that he's going to force himself out. He's gone. Because if you're the Texans and you trade this guy, who's playing for you? J.J. Watt's going to want out. Every player on the team's going to want out. You think Laramie Tunsil signed up for this? You think he signed a long-term extension after the Texans gave up the future to get him? To not play with Deshaun Watson? To rebuild? This is not just fantasy football where you just trade Deshaun, take the picks, draft the quarterback, and all right, here we go. There's personalities. There's egos to deal with. This is not just, Jets offered 4 first-round picks. Let's take them. That's the absolute last resort. And I don't even think that's an option if I'm the Texans. If I'm Nick Caserio, if I'm Cal McNair, I tell Deshaun Watson either show up and play or don't, but we're not trading you. And you're sitting out and not getting paid. Is Deshaun Watson, even though he's a quarterback and they have a long career, much longer than a running back or a linebacker or any other position for that matter, does Deshaun Watson really want to sit out a full year? A full season? J.J. Watt already apologized to him after Week 17, saying they wasted one of his years. Does Deshaun Watson want to waste another one of his years not playing? When he signed this big money extension and the big money does not come in till after next year? I don't think he would. I'd call his bluff if it got to that point. Or how about this for a concept? Fire Jack Easterby, hire Eric Bieniemy, get in the room with Deshaun Watson, Nick Caserio, and Bieniemy, and fix the situation. That's what I would do. But it seems like what common sense would tell you, common sense that you should apply if you're the Texans, it seems like they don't want to use common sense. Because common sense would tell you Jack Easterby, as a former character coach with the New England Patriots, wouldn't still be part of the front office. Common sense would tell you that when Deshaun Watson recommends Robert Saleh and Eric Bieniemy for interviews, two of the hottest names on the coaching market, that you request both those guys, even if you have no intention of hiring them, because your franchise quarterback, you promised his input, listen to his input. He's not saying hire Bieniemy. He's not saying hire Saleh. But they didn't even request Robert Saleh. And they only requested Bieniemy after it became public that was the guy Deshaun Watson wanted. They were the only team not to put the request in for Bieniemy when the season immediately ended and you were allowed to request coaches. They have botched this entire situation, and they deserve all the negative PR they're facing. But I still push back on the notion that they need to trade him, that it can't be salvaged. It's still only January 19th. Remember that when you talk about the Texans and Deshaun Watson.